Have you ever had one of those moments where you, like, totally clicked with someone, you know? Like, you just got where they were coming from.
Right.
Or maybe the opposite. You were just completely off the mark.
Yeah. Totally missed the mark.
Well, today we are diving deep into that ability, the skill behind those moments, something called social perspective taking.
Yeah, that's right. And we have a really fascinating deep dive for you today.
We do.
Because to really understand this, we are looking at a massive amount of research, a review of 92 studies with data from over 213,000 adults to really extract what are the core insights here, and how does this skill of social perspective taking actually play out in our lives?
Yeah, how do we step into someone else's shoes? That's what we want to know based on the evidence.
Yeah, yeah.
So the research actually points to two main ways this ability shows up.
Okay.
First, there's something called dispositional perspective taking.
Okay.
And this is your general go-to. Like, how often do you actually tend to think about things from another person's viewpoint across different situations?
Right.
And it's often considered the cognitive side of empathy.
Yes.
So this dispositional tendency is often measured through self-report questionnaires, like the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, that's the IRI, where you're reflecting on your typical responses in social situations.
Right. So you would just like answer a bunch of questions about generally, how do I tend to respond?
Yeah.
How do I see myself?
Yeah, how do you see yourself?
Yes.
So the second type is called situational perspective taking.
Okay.
And this is about your ability to understand what someone else is thinking or feeling in a very specific right now context.
Right.
So researchers will often use things like photos, animations, or videos to see how well you can actually tune into someone else's immediate experience.
Right. It's very in the moment.
Yes.
It's a reaction to something that's happening right now.
It's happening right now.
Yes.
So the central question this research review aims to answer is, are there factors within us, in our environment, that influence these two types of perspective taking in adults? And importantly, do any of these relate to mental well-being?
Right. Are there things about us,
Yeah.
like our personality, our relationships, that either help or hinder us in being able to do this?
Yeah, exactly. So to start, what is social perspective taking in more detail? Like, what are we really talking about here?
Well, when we say social perspective taking, we're talking about a skill.
Okay.
And it involves your natural inclination to consider others, so that dispositional piece, your motivation to truly understand them, and your actual efforts to see things from their point of view. And these efforts, we're talking about the situational piece.
Right, so it's not just passively observing.
No, it's active, it's engaging.
Yeah, you're actively doing something.
You're trying. Yeah.
And the research really highlights that this is not just a nice skill to have, right?
No.
To, like, be a good person. It's really important for navigating our social world.
It is.
Whether it's personal relationships or professional settings, like how we get along with our friends and family, how we do well at work.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can actually see where somebody else is coming from,
Yeah.
then you can actually behave more appropriately in these situations.
Yeah.
And so, you can think about like a teacher trying to understand why a student is struggling, or, a coworker trying to get your perspective on, on a project or something. It just allows for better interactions.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think this is where it gets interesting, is it also allows for this mental flexibility.
Yeah.
You can look at a social situation from multiple angles, potentially leading to fewer conflicts in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can consider other people's perspectives, then you may be more likely to come up with new ways of approaching the situation that might be more harmonious. And then, potentially reduce the number of conflicts you have in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. Right, because you're not just locked in your own view.
Right, exactly.
So this is where we get to what I think is a really fascinating distinction between social perspective taking and something you might have heard of called theory of mind.
Yes, theory of mind. This is essentially your ability to recognize that other people have their own thoughts and feelings and beliefs and intentions that are different from your own. It's understanding that that your reality and someone else's reality can be different.
So it's not just imagining what they're thinking, but first understanding that they have thoughts.
Precisely, yes. And the researchers in this review were very careful to say that theory of mind is a prerequisite for social perspective taking. You have to first get that someone has a different mental state before you can then try to imagine what that state might be.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, they really focused specifically on research from the last 10 years in social perspective taking. And I think part of the reason for that is just to build on the earlier work that tried to really clarify those distinctions.
Right. So it's like laying the groundwork before you build the house.
Right. Yeah.
You have to understand that people have different minds before you can really try to see through their eyes.
That's a really great way of putting it, yes.
So to give us a framework for understanding how all of these pieces fit together, the review touches on what's called the core network of empathy model.
Okay.
And this model helps explain how we respond with empathy. And social perspective taking is a key component within this model.
Right. Okay.
So what are the main stages of this model that we should know?
So this model highlights three main stages. The first stage is perception.
Okay.
So this is simply taking in information about the other person. So what are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Right.
Yeah. And then the second stage is modulation.
Okay.
And this is where all these various factors that we've been talking about come into play.
Okay.
And they influence how you process that information that you're getting from the other person.
Okay.
So these factors can include your general tendency towards perspective taking.
Right.
So that dispositional aspect that we discussed, but it also includes things like your gender, your current mood, your personality, and even characteristics of the person that you're interacting with and your relationship with them.
So all sorts of things can either help or hinder your ability to really tune in.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
And then the third stage is regulation.
Okay.
And this is where, you make sense of what's going on, your own emotional response, and then crucially, your ability to actually engage in that situational perspective taking within that specific context.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so the model kind of suggests that all of these stages kind of interact to shape your overall empathic response.
So it's not just one thing, but this interplay of all these factors.
It is, yeah. It's a very dynamic process.
Yeah. So let's zoom in on some of the factors that influence dispositional perspective taking, that general tendency that you just have as a person.
Okay. Yeah.
So the research actually found some interesting patterns related to gender.
Yes. So across numerous studies that use self-report questionnaires, women tended to report higher levels of this general tendency to think about things from another person's perspective than men.
Okay.
However, and this is a very important caveat, this difference wasn't always observed when researchers used physiological measures like, heart rate or something like that, or when they directly observed behavior in these more controlled settings.
Right. So what people say they do and what actually happens can be two different things.
They can be, and especially when we're talking about something as complex as social perspective taking or empathy.
Right. So what about age? Does this general tendency for perspective taking change as we age?
Well, it appears so. So the review actually identified an interesting inverted U-shaped pattern in relation to age,
Okay.
where middle-aged adults, so roughly those between the ages of 48 and 64,
Okay.
they tended to report the highest levels of dispositional social perspective taking.
Huh. That's not what you might expect?
No, it's not necessarily intuitive.
So why do you think that might be?
Well, the review doesn't specifically say what the reason is, but I think one could speculate that middle adulthood is often, it involves this really complex web of social roles.
Right.
People are often managing families and they're advancing in their careers. They might be caring for their aging parents. And so this increased social complexity might naturally kind of encourage and develop that tendency to consider other people's viewpoint.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like you're forced to.
You are, yeah, in some ways.
Okay, so let's touch on something I think is really relevant for everyone.
Okay.
Distress.
Yes.
So the research seemed to find a connection between how stressed out we are and our ability to take other people's perspectives in general.
Yes, this is a very consistent finding.
Yeah.
So the review found a negative relationship between self-reported low levels of personal distress and a higher tendency for dispositional social perspective taking.
Okay.
But what I think is even more interesting is the link to these physiological markers of stress. So studies that actually measured cortisol levels, this is the hormone that's associated with stress, they found that lower levels of cortisol were also associated with a greater tendency for social perspective taking.
So it's not just about how stressed out you feel, but there's like a biological component to that.
There is. There really is, yes.
And this hints at that potential protective role for mental health. If you're just generally less stressed out, you might be better equipped to understand others.
Right. And then maybe that creates a more positive feedback loop.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So the review also explores the relationships between different personality traits and this general tendency for perspective taking.
Yes.
So what stood out there?
Well, it seems that certain personality traits often go hand in hand with a greater tendency to see things from another person's point of view.
Okay.
So people who describe themselves as more open to new experiences, more conscientious, more extroverted or outgoing, and more agreeable also tend to score higher on these measures of dispositional social perspective taking.
Okay, so those traits are associated with being better at this.
Yes, they seem to be. Yeah.
Yes. Were there any negative associations with this general tendency for perspective taking?
Yes. So along with the negative link with personal distress, the review found negative relationships with self-reported tendencies towards antisocial behavior and also what's termed subclinical narcissism.
Okay. So if you're generally more self-focused, you might not be as good at this.
Right, because if you're really focused on yourself, you're not attending to other people as much.
Right.
And then you're also less likely to be motivated to understand their perspective.
Right. Okay. So the review also touched on the role of experience and expectations.
Yes.
What did the research reveal there?
Well, so in educational settings, they found that teachers who had more years of teaching experience and teachers who had these more positive expectations for their students tended to show higher levels of dispositional social perspective taking. And similarly, in broader social interactions, adults who reported being generally more supportive in their interactions with others also exhibited this higher tendency.
So it's like the more you actively try to understand others, the better you might become at it.
Right, and maybe the more positively you other people, the more you might be inclined to understand them.
Right, right. Okay, so let's switch gears now and talk about situational social perspective taking. That ability to understand someone in a very specific current moment. What are some of the factors there?
Okay, so one of the really fundamental findings is that people tend to react more quickly when they're focused on their own perspective than when they're actively trying to see what someone else sees in the same situation.
Yeah.
So this suggests that even in these really simple visual tasks, consciously taking another person's viewpoint actually requires more mental effort.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes extra work.
So I guess it's natural for us to see things from our own eyes.
It is. It's the default, yeah.
And it takes more energy to shift.
It does. You have to exert effort.
The review also mentioned something about the ease of self-simulation. What does that mean?
Okay, so this is a really interesting idea. It suggests that when it's easier for you to imagine yourself in the other person's exact situation, it can actually influence your empathic response in that moment.
Okay.
And this is especially true when the situation itself is really ambiguous.
Okay.
Or when you don't have a lot of cognitive resources available.
Right, like you're tired or distracted.
Right, exactly. You're just mentally drained.
Yeah.
And so in those cases, you might actually rely more on your own past experiences to make a guess about what the other person is feeling or thinking.
So if I've been through something similar, even if I'm not consciously trying, my own experience might influence how I understand them.
Exactly, yes. Your own history can serve as a readily available, though potentially not perfectly accurate guide.
Okay.
Yeah.
The review also highlighted visual perspective, so
Yeah.
like literally seeing what they're seeing.
Exactly, yes. So there have been studies that have shown that if you physically move to a position where you share a similar visual viewpoint as the other person, it can actually improve your ability to understand their perspective in that situation.
Okay.
And it's almost like this shift in your physical perspective can trigger a shift in your mental perspective.
So sometimes just changing where you're standing might actually help you see things differently.
Yeah, I think it's a really tangible thing for people to consider in their interactions.
Right. I was intrigued by the mention of vestibular signals,
Yeah.
and that's to do with balance, right?
Yes, it is.
How does that connect to understanding someone else's point of view?
It's a really fascinating connection. So research suggests that even signals related to your sense of balance and your spatial orientation can subtly influence how you interpret another person's actions from their perspective.
Oh, wow.
It's like your brain is using all of the information available to try to build a complete picture of what's happening in that social interaction from their viewpoint.
That's really wild. I never would have thought my sense of balance could influence empathy.
It's amazing. The brain is so complex.
It is. So what about when you're interacting with people you know really well, like close friends or family?
Okay.
How does that familiarity or that closeness affect your ability to take their perspective in a moment?
Well, when you're interacting with someone that you have a strong connection with, like a family member or a close friend, and you see that they're experiencing some sort of distress, it can actually activate what's called this imagined self perspective.
Okay.
And so instead of focusing solely on their feelings, you might start thinking about how you would feel if you were in that situation.
Right.
And this can actually influence your response. And sometimes it can lead to this even more intense emotional reaction because you're kind of feeling it yourself.
So it's like being close to someone can sometimes blur the lines
It can, yes.
between their experience and your own.
Yeah, and I think it also highlights that perspective taking isn't necessarily about perfectly mirroring someone else's experience, but it often involves understanding their experience through your own emotions and your own understanding.
Right. It's almost like you can't remove your own
You
lens.
can't. You're always anchored to your own perspective.
Yeah. So how do these two types of social perspective taking, the general disposition and the situational ability, how do they relate to each other?
Well, it seems logical that they would be connected.
Yeah.
And the review actually suggests that people who just generally tend to think about things from another person's point of view are also likely to be better at doing it in these specific situations.
Okay, so they're not totally separate.
Right.
They do influence each other.
They do. So this is the overall trend. Higher levels of that dispositional perspective taking are often correlated with doing better on these situational perspective taking tasks.
Right. So it's like if you practice considering other people's viewpoints regularly, you might get better at doing it on the spot.
That's a great way of putting it, yes.
So this is all really insightful, but it leads to a really crucial question.
Okay.
Can you actually improve these abilities?
Okay.
Is this something you're just born with, or can it change?
Well, the good news is that the evidence suggests that both dispositional and situational social perspective taking are actually quite malleable. And they can actually be improved through these relatively brief interventions and these targeted training programs.
So you're not stuck with what you have.
You're not, no.
Okay, so what kind of interventions or training are we talking about here?
Well, the review actually mentions examples of studies that have shown these positive changes in perspective-taking skills after interventions that specifically encourage participants to actively consider these different viewpoints in various scenarios. And these can be hypothetical scenarios or real-life scenarios.
Okay.
So, these might involve things like role-playing exercises, or they might involve discussions that really focus on understanding other people's motivations. Or they might even use storytelling as a way of exploring different perspectives.
So it's not a fixed trait, it's a skill that you can actually work on.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a skill that can be developed just like you can develop any other skill.
Okay, that's empowering.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So the review also touched on some broader ideas and potential avenues for future research.
Yes.
One that stood out to me was perspective coordination.
Yes.
What does that involve?
So perspective coordination is this kind of more complex skill
Okay.
that goes beyond just simply understanding one other person's viewpoint.
Okay.
It actually involves coordinating multiple perspectives.
Okay.
And especially coordinating those perspectives when those perspectives might be very different from your own
Right.
or very different from each other.
So you can think about this like, if you're trying to resolve a conflict within a group, you're not just trying to understand one other person. You're actually trying to understand multiple viewpoints and how those viewpoints relate to each other.
Right.
Yeah. And so this ability to actually juggle all those different perspectives can lead to this greater flexibility in your behavior and how you approach problem solving.
So it's going from one-on-one to understanding group dynamics.
It is. It is. Yeah.
And it reminded us that you can never perfectly take another person's perspective.
Right. That's really important. And I think it's important to remember that you're always anchored to your own experiences, to your own background, your own way of seeing the world. And empathy isn't about completely merging with another person's identity.
Right.
It's about using your own knowledge and your own emotional understanding to try to make sense of what it must be like for them.
So you're using your framework to understand them. You're not trying to become them.
You're not. And
Yeah.
you can't.
Right.
Yeah.
What about where research might go in the future? The review had some suggestions for researchers.
Yes. So they suggest that future studies could really benefit from using those more objective situational perspective-taking tasks in addition to the self-report questionnaires. And really trying to, to really differentiate between the emotional and cognitive aspects of empathy in those measures.
Okay.
Because if we could start to kind of tease apart those different components, it could give us a more nuanced understanding of how they relate to, to people's ability to take another person's perspective.
Right. And in educational settings, there's a lot of potential to explore how cognitive empathy, which seems to be linked to lower personal distress, and emotional empathy, which might sometimes be associated with higher distress, impact the well-being and potential burnout of teachers.
Right, yeah. It would be really helpful, I think, for educators to have a better understanding of those different aspects of empathy and how they might be playing out in their own well-being.
Yeah. This has been a deep dive into social perspective taking.
It has.
So, to bring it all together, what are the key takeaways here?
So the key points are that social perspective taking is a really important skill,
Okay.
and it has this general or dispositional side, and it has a more specific or situational side. And both of those sides are actually influenced by a variety of different factors. So your gender, your age, certain aspects of your personality, even your stress levels.
Right.
And the research seems to suggest a connection between your ability to see things from other people's viewpoints and your own mental well-being, where lower stress is often linked to higher perspective taking.
Right.
And importantly, both of these aspects of perspective taking are not fixed.
Right.
They can actually be developed and improved through conscious effort and training.
So it makes you think about how your own inclination to consider different perspectives plays out in your daily life.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And whether those are, really significant interactions or seemingly small interactions, how's that actually impacting your overall well-being?
Right.
Yeah, and I think on that note, a final thought to consider is, given that, that this ability to step into someone else's shoes is something that we can cultivate, what are the broader implications of really actively fostering these skills, not just in ourselves, but in the people around us? In a world that often feels, incredibly complex and interconnected,
Yeah.
could the development of perspective taking be really crucial to navigating these social landscapes more effectively?
It's a good question.
It is. And could it help us, build greater understanding across those different perspectives? I think it's really something worth thinking about.
It is.